Yeah. So here we are again, Paul and myself. We get these talks together every couple of weeks. The series is about humanity. We started talking about how to develop human beings, and then to actually let's just talk about what are human beings. And so we've been developing our thinking along those lines, and it's very much an uncut discussion. And so Paul today has chosen the subject of death, which is a very interesting subject, and I think it's got a lot to do with life as well. So over to you, Paul. I'm beautifully unprepared for this. So I'll try and respond to some of your points as you come across. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I had one big stimulus for this and one not so big stimulus for this. And the big one is that my father, it's been a year since he died, and he was a 97-year-old man. He died in rather extreme circumstances, in that he was admitted to hospital for a fall, and was fine and was being checked out. And that happened on March the 1st. And then but then later that day, he was assaulted by someone who obviously had very severe mental issues and also very, 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 very good upper body strength, because he was beaten so severely that he was transferred from Whipps Cross Hospital to the Royal London, and he died a week later. And it's just been hugely complicated. There's been an internal investigation, and if anyone knows anything about the NHS, you can imagine how effective that's been. There's been a police investigation, criminal investigation, and everything. But it was my first big encounter with death, and the death of a parent, and the feelings of mortality. And I would say that I have always had, and the other thing was, so there's that, and then there was then I was having a conversation with someone about the Bible, and I wanted to evangelize to this guy, to share the gospel with him. And I've got a pretty, one of the ways that I'll do it, especially if I'm doing it over text or messaging, I find a really good way into that is what do you think happens after you die? And this guy just went on this huge, it's like, oh, well, why does that matter? And it's like, well, and it was just, he was a smart guy. And I looked at what he'd written, and it's like, it matters a lot. And it matters a lot. You just don't want to talk about it because you don't have very firm ideas about it. Yeah. And that's why you're in avoidance. And I remember I had this feeling so strongly when COVID kicked off, and we started seeing this sort of like industrial strength lunacy descend on the globe, from the governing classes to people hoarding toilet paper. And it was just a very clear thing for me. It's like people are just scared of death. And certainly in Western society, there's kind of like there's another aspect to that, which is not the same but similar, which is we're also scared of suffering. We think suffering is abnormal, and suffering is actually anything but abnormal. Everyone suffers, even God suffers. In fact, it's let's face it, God suffers more than anyone else.
Yeah.
And a lack of acceptance of that can create a lot of problems. And that's why this guy said, oh, why, wouldn't it be more wouldn't it make more sense to sort of focus on what we're doing in this life than what happens on the next? And I go, well, not really, because if you focus on where you want to go next, it's going to have a massive impact on what you need to do on this life.
Yeah.
And I had, just to process for a bit, I had quite a remarkable sort of set of emotions come to me with my father's death, because it didn't really trouble me. It didn't upset me. I was more concerned about how my sister would take it, and how my mother would take it. I actually felt a sense of relief, and to be honest with you, a mild euphoria. And again, it was surprising to be able to acknowledge that, to experience that. It sent me into for about 2 weeks. I went into a very profound. It's good to remember this, actually. A very profound sort of like feeling of grace. I could feel God's grace and God's protection around me. And also I have good friends like yourself, and I lean very, very heavily on my pastors, Pastor Kirley and Pastor Tim in Australia, and I have good friends from recovery who are Christians as well. So I was surrounded by a really good crew of people who were able to sort of help me process what I was going through, and to take the positive aspects from it. It was an opportunity for me to sort of step up and become the man of the family. So it had that sort of the sort of destiny aspect. I was able to do that. I was able to go and organize the funeral for about 40 seconds. I would say probably the most panic that I had, which was for about 40 seconds, which was, what do I say at my father's eulogy? Because my father and I never had a close relationship. And then as soon as I was like, oh, how am I going to write that? The answer became immediately, which is like, why don't I write about the one conversation that I've never been able to have with him, that I wanted to have with him? And this was primarily because he had Alzheimer's that was becoming increasingly worse. And that was, I'd never effectively shared the gospel with him. So that became the eulogy, and that was fun. And the funeral was great. It was a shame that my mother didn't attend the funeral. She had a nervous breakdown 5 years ago and has never been able to recover from that properly, or take some of the action that one needs to take to sort of to recover from that. But it was it's been quite a year. And the only other thing is it's funny. When I went to go and have a look at the body, I had this feeling about when you're going to go and do something, and that it's something that you're going to remember for the rest of your life. That was an important moment of closure. It was the first time that I'd had any intimacy with a dead. I mean, I've seen dead bodies because I've lived in Asia, and they can pop up with more regularity than, that's the other thing. We're so insulated from death in the West. We and it's not healthy. It's not healthy at all. It's a natural part of life. If you don't understand what a good death looks like, or how to die well, then you won't live well. I sort of like, just as a complete aside here, it's like I'm always amazed by, like, my I don't work with this guy anymore, but at the time I had a sponsor who had cancer, and he elected to go on this hideous course of chemotherapy. And I'm thinking, like, if I had the choice to sort of like die, and he's lived a good life. I mean, he's in his late 70s. If I had the choice to die or go through basically having half my throat cut out, which would impact on how I could speak, how I could swallow, how, like, even like, forget about eating, but just swallowing saliva was painful for him. It's like, why didn't you just? I would have just chosen a sort of like nice quiet death rather than over that. So I think, I guess what I'm saying is that I think that it's not something that we have a healthy attitudes towards in Western secular society. And as a result of that, I think that creates a neurosis that spills over into almost everything we do. So many people just have it's fuel for materialism, which we all know ultimately doesn't satisfy, or mortality projects where, you try workaholism where people pour themselves into their work. Yeah. So I just think it feels good. I just feel that sort of like for me, it was my father, and it was a healthy process. I learned a lot. It brought me closer to God, and yeah, and I think that I've always had this thing about death, and I just feel grateful for that. Because I can be quite a sissy at times. It's like I don't, someone posted something on LinkedIn and it's like, oh, change. And I was like, I hate change. I've never liked change. It's like I like doing things the way I like doing them, and I don't like changing. But I've kind of always understood that sort of like, death is a big deal, and we need to be down with that. We need to be ready for that. We need to be thinking about that, because how we think about that informs how we think about everything else.
Yeah. And you personally, Paul, thinking about your own death, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I hope it'll be painless. I mean, that's my biggest thought. I hope it'll be painless, and I hope that sort of like my faith will carry me through.
Yeah.
I would. I hope that I can go to church. I hope that I can worship. I hope that I'll have my eyesight so I can, read the Bible, listen to the Bible, and just be encouraged, because it's sort of like, for a Christian, it's like you're just about, you're walking the red carpet.
Yeah.
It's like the red velvet rope. It's like, I was reading one of the Psalms. It's like, that we are invited to the wedding feast of the Lamb, right? It's one big party.
Yeah.
Feasting.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's interesting. Thanks for that. I think for me, just thinking about what you just said, I think it's a situation that's quite unique because we have no control over it, and we have no knowledge of it. No experience of it, let's say. And so in terms of fear, it's totally uncertain. And as a rule, we hate things that we don't understand.
Sure.
That we just can't. So it's a pretty much an unprocessable event. I think for me, one of the nicest analogies is a pastor, a really good guy called Liam from King's Church, who gave this analogy of a piece of string, and he pulled out this piece of string, right the way across the church, and he said, "Your life is that much of this piece of string."
Like that much?
Yeah, it's absolutely compared.
No, it's absolutely, man. It's just
and so
crazy.
And so, therefore, whilst we have a responsibility on earth to do our stuff and to do it well, in fact, Paul actually says that if you don't believe in life after death, you may as well create as much carnage as possible, and
sure,
which makes complete sense. But of course, I don't think people necessarily believe that, and I think certainly as Christians we believe there's life after death, and Jesus is the living proof of that. Literal historical proof, which is a lot of people would either choose not to look at or even process, or just ignore the facts that Jesus actually died and came back to life, and that's very much what's going to happen to us. So I guess for me, I think the other thing in terms of fear, one of the most important things to do is to face it, to actually come to terms with it. For me, I nearly died. I had appendicitis, peritonitis, gangrene, septicemia, the whole thing all in one go.
Really? Wow.
And I had appendicitis. I went very badly wrong. And I actually had it. You mentioned about swallowing. I had a tube down my nose that went down into my stomach, and I describe it as being on the bottom of the pond. I was really, I was down to ground zero. My whole world was completely reset. I left my 700 horsepower Mitsubishi Evolution in the car park in the hospital, and it's almost like that whole part of my life was gone. And
how long are you like that for?
Not long, oddly enough. I was actually back in the gym doing exactly the same circuits a month later. So
Okay.
Although my stomach completely stopped. You know, I nearly died from this whole shock. But it's amazing how quickly you get back. Well, thank God, I got back. Although my stomach still isn't 100%. But so I think, oddly enough, I've thought about it quite a bit. I don't have much fear of death whatsoever. I think for me, I'd be a bit disappointed if I hadn't sort of done what I wanted to do. I'm not quite sure. I think I've done quite a lot in my life. I think I'm pretty pleased with what I've done. Pretty pleased with the kids I've brought up and created. I'd like to spend more time with them, from a selfish perspective. And I think if you've got kids, you're a bit concerned about, who's going to look after them, that sort of thing.
Sure.
But actually, again, if you trust God, actually, it's easy to look at your kids and think poor little things. Actually, they're as tough as nails if you've got God on their side. And so I'm quite pleased from that perspective that they have got that strength, they've got that backbone, they've got that love. So I don't actually have any fear of death.
But if you've done that, you've given them everything that's job done. That's tick.
Yeah. Well, I think thank you, Paul. Yeah. So I don't, to be honest, I don't have any fear of death. At all, really. Which may sound a bit selfish, maybe, or I don't know, but
aren't you afraid of the potential discomfort?
Well, there's discomfort anyway, isn't there? There's always discomfort. It's just a different type of discomfort. I'm pretty good at resisting pain. I've had my nose broken a lot of times. I've played rugby. I've had, to be honest, I quite enjoy a bit of a challenge. I mean, I think one of the tragedies, I remember when my mother died. She had difficulties, not dissimilar to your mother, but she actually found her purpose in death, in terms of
Wow.
she actually found her way. She was a wonderful woman, very bright. She was a doctor, but somehow she lost her way and she started sort of eating herself up. And she found a purpose when she got cancer, and she fought it all the way through to the end. So, yeah, and it's very difficult losing a parent. I mean, there's two sides of death. One is losing someone around you, which is very difficult if it's a close family member. And actually losing a parent is a situation not to be understated, regardless of what your relationship is with those people. So I think it's something that I should have spent more time looking after myself after my mother died, which I didn't, needless to say. It was quite a long time ago, 15 years ago. So it's sort of, firing all cylinders and all egos and all the rest of it. So
Right.
that caught up with me a bit. But I don't think I've got any fear of death at all, really. So I mean, I think my faith is hugely important. That's the thing that gives me comfort. In fact, Christians should look forward to death, oddly enough. So
Well, exactly. Yeah, that's the thing. It's
it's
like,
like this
well,
weird
hey,
paradox, isn't it?
it's like, okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
And I do, it's like I sort of like, one of my favorite things to go to sleep is I sort of like go to sleep and I sort of like imagine what heaven's going to be like. I've got a bit of a thing about angels, like the whole choir of angels, all these different types of angels. I think it's going to be unbelievably, because they're going to be bonkers, man. They're going to it's like the cherubim. Yeah. The thrones sound pretty cool. And you read Revelations, and it's like it's like we're all, there's work to be done. We go off and we sort of we're architecting, we're doing all kinds of stuff.
I think there's something, but it's more. I think there is something that actually I was talking to a friend of mine, which is related to Revelations, which is actually, this collapse of society, which you and I have been talking about a bit in relation to the reversal of good and evil, and what's right or wrong, and some of the things that are taking place at the moment, some of the epidemics, and leaving Christians sort of very much out on a limb, was frankly with it holding the crown jewels, not in a smug sort of way, because there's a responsibility to share the crown jewels with everybody else. But I think that process is hugely difficult up to, you know, the point of death. So I think that that's going to be the notion of life. I think within in the context of the demise of society, which I think we're witnessing currently, that is,
Yeah, for sure.
that's
Definitely the
difficult.
decline of Western civilization.
Yeah.
I mean,
And-
you know,
and
having
Jesus-
said that, I think that, you know, Latin, you know, there's hope in Latin America, there's hope in Eastern Europe.
Yeah, I think the other thing is actually, you know, when Jesus talks about death, he talks about people who are alive but dead, you know, which is spiritually dead. In other words, not connected. So I think it's almost like that's a worse state to be in.
Well, there's a lot of people in that. It's like this just, you know, I mean, I can understand because I'm an addict, and so I can understand how easy it is to keep yourself in delusion. But it's like, how could you just not be asking yourself these major questions?
I know.
It's like, you know, why am I here? What should I do? You know, what the three fundamental questions: why am I here? What should I do? Where am I going?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, the total disregard for the book that's got the answers. I mean, it's like, you know, the Bible has all the answers, and
Yeah,
you may,
100%.
you may or may not agree with it. But at least it's like it's like a A to Z or a signpost, which gives you some pretty good clues. But the sheer arrogance. I mean, and I include
Well, it's
myself.
arrogant because people have never read it, or they read it when they were kids.
Yeah, I know.
And it's like, you know, I mean, I didn't get into this, making this comment with this guy. But what I was, you know, one of the things I was thinking of saying, it's like, you haven't been born again, so you won't understand most of it.
Yeah.
And so the great, you know, because the great thing is the Bible is the only book on the planet where you can sit down and have a private session with the author every time you read it.
Yeah.
Right.
If you're a Christian, though.
If you're, well, yes, if you're a Christian.
Yeah.
Because it's a two-way communication.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you can,
yeah,
for sure. And it's one of those things, it's like, the more you read it, guaranteed, the more you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, I totally. I think, but when I think back to my my sort of egotistical, out of control, sort of young man stage of life, I think the last thing on this earth I would have contemplated was, in fact, definitely the last thing on this earth I'd have contemplated was reading the Bible. So I think there's a certain amount of experience that, you know, or certain set of circumstances which brings you down to earth to actually get to the point of humility to be able to have a realistic look in the mirror and actually start asking some of these difficult questions. And it does require some sort of signpost and decent advocate, you know, from which we are now, Paul, aren't we? You know, to signpost others to this particular situation in their own particular way, because otherwise, I think the notion of living dead, I think, is worse than being dead.
Yeah.
Because it's a delusional comfort, and it's like an itch you can't scratch. And it's a horrible sort of arrogance and hubris, which is very unfulfilling. And it, you know, and it leaves
you end up working for the WF or becoming a climate change advocate. Actually,
yeah, if you're lucky, yeah.
We were all green hair, identifying as a penguin. You know, and there's you know, there's something, there's another version of that we see in all the pseudo spirituality, which is just warming up paganism, which is people who are asleep dreaming that they're awake.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's,
you know, so many. It's like, you know, I really annoyed some of the other. I said, how can you be spiritual without the Holy Spirit, right? It's like, and you can't. And it's like, to be spiritual, to have supernatural gifts, which the Bible promises, they don't just get handed out. It'd be lovely if they did. I mean, I for one would be delighted if you didn't have to do any work for it. But there is something that you have to. There is something you have to do. You have to believe and accept Christ. But there is work. It's like so many people. It's like they want to look spiritual or they want to feel spiritual, but they don't want to do the actual work of being spiritual.
Yeah. Well, I think Yeah, I think the other thing with that is also when you ask a pagan or an atheist or whatever they call themselves, or however they sort of self-identify, um, they make up a story which is remarkably similar to the Bible. If like the Katie Hopkins was talking the other day, in that talk he sent to me, around basically leaving the earth a better place than when you arrived, which actually isn't too dissimilar to actually what what our responsibilities on earth, although it's a bit more, there's a way of doing that, over and above sort of making sure your kids are okay and all that sort of stuff, which is obviously very important, but actually making sure your kids are okay without giving them the tools to to give them the strength to cope with what's coming at them is utterly irresponsible as well. So, and I do think that the utter cruelty of taking faith out of schools and inserting all the rest of this rubbish is really very cruel to our kids, and it's subjecting most of them to.
Well, yeah, who's going to disciple them? If you don't, someone else will.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that sort of death-like existence, spiritual death on earth, is a really terrible thing. So I think that's another type of death, which we're quite lucky not to live death on the.
Well, it's darkness. I mean, it's the kingdom of darkness, and it's really binary. It's like if you're not with Christ, you're a child of, the devil's your daddy. I'm sorry, it's really harsh, but that's just the truth of it.
Well, you are dead.
Says that.
Well, Jesus says you are dead, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Your spirit, you're dead.
Yeah.
Which is,
we're not all God's children. We're all God's creation. Sort of like we become adopted with Christ. And then you're in the fan, which is great. Lamb's Book of Life, all that good stuff. But until then, it's like, no.
So I guess it comes.
By the way, just as a quick one, you should watch. Did you watch that Melissa Doherty thing with the devil?
I'm not sure.
She's really funny. You should watch it. It's very, very funny.
Okay, yeah, I will do. Yeah, good. Excellent. So that's cheered me up for the weekend anyway, Paul, talking about death. But I mean, it's not something I worry about. It's not something I think about. In fact, if anything,
it's something you have thought about, isn't it?
Yeah, it's something I really have thought about. It's something I've almost experienced. It's not something I'm fearful of at all. I'm not even fearful of the process, to be honest. So there's a huge amount of uncertainty, but I think that comes down to trusting God. So I think why am I not worried about it? About this huge uncertainty of and no control over when and how and what's after. I suppose it's a manifestation which I shouldn't take for granted of my trust in God, on the basis that I'm a Christian. So there we are. Anything else you'd add to that?
No, not really. But why don't we close this off then? There was something I want to talk to you about.
Brilliant. Let's do that.
So yeah.